Welcome to Expanding Your Faith, a podcast that tackles modern-day issues with a focus on spirituality, with Bishop Greer Godsey, Reverend Marc Trimm, and Bishop Ben Williams. Thanks for listening. Take a breath, open your heart, and let's expand your faith together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Expanding Your Faith. I'm Bishop Greer, and joining me tonight is Bishop Ben.
Greetings and blessings to all.
So, Reverend Marc is not with us tonight. He is on vacation. We hope he's having a wonderful vacation and getting plenty of rest and relaxation.
Right.
Tonight, we're going to talk about loneliness is a spiritual crisis, not just a social one. And I want to remind you before we get started that you can always catch previous editions of this podcast, previous shows, on podcasts.myocci.social, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite podcast from. Loneliness is often treated as a personal mood problem, something to fix with a hobby or a phone call, when it is actually a widespread and serious crisis with real spiritual, physical, and social weight. People are more digitally connected than any generation in history and report feeling more isolated than ever. It just doesn't add up. And part of that, something that doesn't add up, is that while we are more connected digitally, we have very little actual personal human contact with one another. Loneliness is not just a social inconvenience, it's a spiritual condition. And Scripture takes seriously this spiritual condition from its very first pages. And the church has both a theological and a practical opportunity to respond to it, in which we're going to do tonight. I want to mention, too, that this aspect of loneliness that we deal with is an epidemic in the country. And it predates COVID, it predates the shutdowns, it predates quarantines. It is a problem that has developed out of our dependence upon social media, upon digital communications devices, versus actual physical contact with another human being. Zoom is a good example of this. While it can be a great tool and can link us to other people around the world, it is no substitute for actual in-person contact with other people. So a question I want you to keep in mind as we go through this episode is, what does it say that the very first thing God calls not good in all of creation is a human being being alone? What does it say that the very first thing God calls not good in all of creation is a human being being alone? So Bishop Ben, what's your initial reactions? Have you noticed loneliness showing up more in pastoral care and conversations with parishioners in recent years?
Actually, yes. And you're actually correct about this didn't pop up during COVID. COVID was the catalyst that made it worse, yes. But loneliness has been around 30 ages. I noticed that a lot of my parishioners were telling me that they were struggling with COVID, not COVID, but loneliness back in the 80s, in the 70s, because most people that I encountered, hospitals are shut-ins or what they call recluses. They stay inside their house and they don't go in public. So they have that less contact of human contact, and it makes it harder for them to communicate and make friends, and so the loneliness sets in. And I see it quite frequently here, especially among the clergy, first responders, nurses, and medical staff, etc.
Certainly, and those people that are in those types of jobs in particular deal with loneliness because a lot of people just don't understand the stresses and the issues that they face on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So they end up being even more isolated because people just don't know what to say to them.
Right.
So what does Scripture say about aloneness and community? Well, if we go all the way back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, God says, "It is not good for man to be alone. Let us make a helper similar to himself." This is the first thing in the entire creation narrative that God explicitly names as not good. Before sin, before the fall, before anything has gone wrong, God has already pegged loneliness as a major problem. The implication is significant. Humans are made for relationship at the most foundational level of the created order. It's not optional. It's not just an add-on to spiritual life, but it's part of what it means to be made in the image of a relational God. God wants us to have a relationship with Him, and by extension, He wants us to have a relationship with each other. The image of God itself, described in Genesis 1:27 as male and female together, already contains relationship within it. Aloneness, being alone, is a departure from the pattern of creation, not a neutral state. If He made man to be a relational being, then by extension, the lack of relationship, the lack of companionship, the lack of friends speaks to a breakdown in the social and creational order. Community shapes the early church as well. Acts 2:44 through 47 talks about the earliest Christian community being described as being together constantly, breaking bread in their homes, sharing meals, holding possessions in common. Community was not an add-on program to first century faith. It was the basic shape of it. They lived in a communal state, what we would more commonly refer to as hippies. And maybe the hippies had something right in their philosophy, Bishop.
Right. And I was going to piggyback off of that if I can. That's why Jesus preferred home churches, or he used to go to people's homes and have a conversation with them and teach from the home, because it was easier to have that gathering and make fellowship with the home party than to be out in a temple or out in a big field. Yes, you can reach masses, but are you truly having communion? Are you truly having a fellowship with a big group?
Right.
That's what I like about St. Miriam's and St. George's Parish. They have home masses,
Right.
which I like, because it brings a smaller gathering together, have communion and fellowship.
Correct. Hebrews 10:24 through 25 says, "Let us consider one another in order to provoke charity and good works, not abandoning our assembly as some others have grown accustomed to doing, but consoling one another." This is Paul directly warning the ancient church against the exact pattern many people fall into today, drifting away from a gathered community. They find themselves embracing loneliness over the fellowship with one another. And Paul mentions how it is not a good thing, that we need to be there for each other, consoling one another, loving one another, treating each other with kindness and compassion. That's part of the order that God intended. And then in 1 Corinthians 12, Paul goes even further by making the metaphor about the image of the body, where each needs each part. Isolation from the body is described almost as a kind of dismemberment, not simply a scheduling gap. Paul makes it very clear that we can't live without the various parts of the body, or that life becomes extremely difficult. You don't understand that fully until you've sprained an ankle or broken a toe or ended up dealing with something like carpal tunnel or arthritis, and where your body or your joints ache or become difficult to use. Then all of a sudden you understand this concept.
Right.
That we can't live without a part of the body, and just as that, we can't live without fellowshipping with one another. We can't live without being connected to one another in some personal way. Bishop?
And I was going to say, to add to that, people go to church and they still say, I heard people say, "Well, Father, I still feel lonely." Well, let's examine how you come to church. Do you come to church with a big burden? Do you come with a lot of stress? Is your heart opened or is it hardened? All that plays a factor. When we get ready for Mass, if we have a walk into Mass and we have a big burden on our shoulders and our heart, it reflects in the way we do Mass. People can see it. So I try not to go to Mass with a heavy heart, because it makes it harder for me to minister the sacraments correctly. So I tell people, yes, there is a factor of feeling lonely in church, but you have to be able to open up in church and let people minister to you to make you feel less lonely.
Absolutely. That's the big part of connection. And do understand, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When you have connections with other people, you are going to open yourself up to being hurt. That's just part of the process. And a lot of people close themselves off because they have been hurt by others. And I understand that. But by the same token, the greater issue becomes loneliness. The hurt that you receive will eventually pass. But loneliness is a disease that is greater than the hurt you've experienced.
Right.
And even Jesus didn't do this alone. He called 12 disciples to follow him, to spend time with him, to eat with him. He partook of huge gatherings of people eating, and he fed the 5,000.
Right.
And in his most agonizing hour in Gethsemane, explicitly asked his closest friends, his 3 closest friends, to stay near him in Matthew 26:38, when he said, "Stay here and watch with me." Even in that time of great pain and agony, Jesus felt the need to have his closest friends near him.
Right. And you would think people hear that and they say, what was he thinking? Why would he want to have anybody with him during that great agony? But it makes sense. It really does, because he's trying to keep from feeling that loneliness that appears when you're being persecuted.
That's right, 100%. If the incarnate Son of God, in his moment of greatest anguish, asked for human companionship rather than facing it entirely alone, that says something about what human beings are built for and what is genuinely lost
Right.
when someone faces suffering in total isolation. I have, and I know Bishop Ben has too, as a hospital chaplain, we have been at the bedside of people dying of cancer, of liver failure, of kidney disease, of AIDS and HIV, who had no one who would come to see them, no one who would sit with them in their final moments.
Right.
I was a part of a program at the hospital before I left called No One Dies Alone, NODA. It's a nationwide program.
Yes, it is.
Developed for people who have no family or friends who visit them or who can stay with them, who are dying. And we know that people take shifts sitting with that person until they pass away.
Right. I've done many of those.
So that they don't die alone. Because one of the greatest issues is dying alone. So many people in hospitals across the world die alone every day.
Right, they sure do. And people don't realize when we do that, even the nurses, even though they know that the program exists, I don't think really the nurses really understand fully how it comforts the patient, because they're so busy taking care of the patient, they don't have time to fully appreciate what we do as chaplains for the hospital.
Right.
And what the program does too, because they say, how do you sit there and just be with them knowing that they're going to the outcome?
Right.
Well, I'm not here for me, I'm here for them.
That's right.
I'm here to comfort them in their final hours. May that be talking to them, holding their hand, or just being in the room.
The last patient I sat with in NODA was a gentleman who had been a war vet from Vietnam. He was dying of cancer. And he had no one. Nobody came to visit him. And all I did was sit and read the Psalms to him. And whenever he was struggling, his struggle would get less as I read the Psalms.
Right.
His struggle would get less. He would toss around less. He would be less agitated. And so I'd sit there and read the Psalms to him. Speaking of the Psalms, even the Psalms don't pretend loneliness isn't real.
No, they don't.
Psalms 25:16 says, "Look upon me and have mercy on me, for I am alone and poor." David, writing the Psalms, gives explicit, honest language for loneliness directed at God, not shame for feeling it.
Right.
And then Psalm 68:16 says, "God causes those who are alone to dwell in a house." One of God's own stated characteristics is placing the isolated into family and belongings.
Right.
God doesn't forsake those that are alone. God supports and loves those who are alone.
You think about that psalm you just read and really think about it and you tear it apart and you really apply it to actual homes. I've been to homes where people have asked for home blessings that the home feels lonely in itself.
Right.
And that's because it's not because of the person's character, it's just the way it is. It's just empty. It just has that empty feeling.
Right.
And I like the fact that we use the Psalms to comfort people because it does bring comfort for certain people.
That's very true. So let's look at the scope of the crisis right now. This is a documented public health concern, not
Right.
just a feeling.
It is.
Loneliness and social isolation have been formally identified by public health researchers and the U.S. Surgeon General as a serious health risk, with data linking chronic loneliness to increased risk of heart disease, stroke, dementia, and early death, comparable in some studies to the health impact of smoking. This is not exaggeration or spiritual metaphor. It is a measurable physical harm tracked in public health data. And that's hard science. People who are lonely, people who don't have people to support them and love them, heal at a slower rate. They have more issues with various diseases and mental health issues. It's just a known fact. It's a scientific fact.
And there's a big debate, especially here in Texas, between healthcare professionals and counselors that say, well, loneliness is not a mental health, and the other half say, yes, it is. I agree it is. Very much so is a mental health issue. And with the lack of resources within the U.S. and Texas for mental health care, it becomes a bigger issue.
Right. It absolutely does. And there is a digital paradox to this. People are more connected digitally than ever before in history. And yet loneliness has been rising, particularly among young people and the elderly. Two groups on the opposite ends of life who might be expected to have very different social experiences both report increases in isolation. A screen can simulate the appearance of connection without providing the actual substance of being known, without being physically present with someone or being cared for in tangible ways. And I'm not saying that phones and tablets and computers are bad. It's a question of what kind of connection actually meets the need built into human beings since Genesis.
Right.
And the reality is that while seeing someone over a screen and connecting with them online can provide some connection, it doesn't always provide the kind of connection human beings need.
Right. And to go with that, people don't realize, and this is not just for intimacy, but this is for everyday living.
Right.
Humans, whether it be female, male, non-binary, whatever, we need the touch century because the touching of a human touch stimulates the brain to feel good. It creates all kinds of endorphins and feel good stuff, chemicals that make you feel happy and feel relaxed, and reduces the cortisol. People don't realize that.
Right. And that's why it's so important sometimes to just be able to reach out and touch someone.
Right.
If it's nothing more than a handshake or a hug or holding their hand, it is so important because that is part of what we as human beings are designed for. The elderly in particular who have lost a spouse or whose adult children live far away are most at risk. Young people navigating a culture of digital-first relationships and declining participation in the kinds of institutions they would normally get involved with, churches, clubs, unions, neighborhood associations, that used to reliably produce in-person community. They're just not there, or they don't take advantage of them anymore.
Right. And I find, especially in my parish area that I serve, especially the Metroplex of Houston, I find that most of the young people are more in tune with iPads, cell phones, the digital stuff, instead of having an actual physical in-person coffee meetup or just eating out, having a dinner or maybe meet in a park. I find that I ask the young people, well, what is your thinking behind that? And most of them feel that a hug or a general handshake is cringe to them. And for me, that makes me think, why is it cringe? I don't get to
Right.
today's youth. I really don't understand it.
Another group of people that are most at risk are people who have been isolated from family or community because of who they are. For instance, the LGBTQIA plus individuals rejected by their family of origin, people estranged over divorce, people isolated by chronic illness or disability, people released from incarceration and cut off from previous relationships. We talk a lot about those cut off because of divorce or those cut off because of who they are or because of disability or chronic illness. We don't talk much about people who are incarcerated and no longer have connections or whose connections fear being around them. So even the incarcerated who have served their sentence deal with this type of loneliness.
Right. And unfortunately, when they get released from prison, nobody prepares them to become a part of the society again. So they're always taught that they're the scum of the earth, they're rejected, they're not to be trusted. But that's not true. They're not animals. They deserve love and compassion like everybody else.
That's correct.
They have paid their debt to society. We can't judge them anymore.
The Voice Vegan says, I've got post-traumatic stress disorder and haven't left my house in 5 years. I'm afraid to go outside. I understand that. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Right.
Are those people, too, that have agoraphobia or have anxiety or have PTSD and can't go and socialize the way we would normally go and socialize. But your experience in loneliness is just as great, if not greater, than anyone else's.
Right. And it's very much so valid because in my ministry here in Houston area, I deal with people like that. It's a matter of how to bring them out of their shell. It can be done, but it takes time. It's just not going to come out of your house instantaneously.
Right, absolutely.
But we still love you. We love you all, and we'll be there for you all if you need us.
That's right. And that's why we're discussing this topic, is to hopefully provide some help and insight to people who are going through that kind of loneliness.
Right.
And then on top of that, others who are at great risk of loneliness, the specific vulnerability of clergy and caregivers themselves.
Right.
Who often pour out care constantly while having very few people pouring back into them. And
there's many days, even me and you, we suffer from that loneliness and anxiety of being lonely because our job is so hard that people just don't know how to talk to us. They figure, oh, well, they hear that we're priests and all of a sudden they get like, how do we talk to them then? They shy away because they don't know what to say.
Or as clergy, we've been taught that we can't be friends with people in our flock because that breeds familiarity, which then makes it more difficult to shepherd. And so we shy away from any kind of meaningful connections to the people under our care, which damages us, and it doesn't help them either.
Right, it doesn't.
Sunday morning. So why the church has sometimes made this worse? That's what I'm trying to get at. Why the church has sometimes made this worse. Sunday morning attendance is not the same as belonging. A person can attend weekly worship and still be entirely unknown by anyone in the room. Showing up is not the same thing as being seen. Many congregations are structured around a single large gathering with little infrastructure for the smaller, sustained relationships that actually address loneliness. That's why it is so very important for churches to have groups of people to help make others feel welcome, seen, and feel like they belong. It is so important to engage with one another, not just sit in the pew next to each other.
Right, and I agree with that. And there's too much, it's done too often, and that's why I'm not a fan of the mega churches, because the mega churches tend to have 15, 20, 30,000 members. How can you truly make a connection within that church if you don't know the members? And the pastor doesn't know who you are. He could pass by you in the hallway, and for all he knows, you could be a staff member or a maintenance worker. How would you know? How can you form an actual connection? That's why I like the small parishes where we have small parishes that are small and manageable, where we can make a connection with our congregation, and the congregation can make a connection within the congregation itself. Make a connection with your partner in the pew, your friend, your family, whoever's in the pews with you. Make connections. Make that effort to reach out and say, hey, welcome. Get to know them.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, church culture can quietly punish people for being alone. Church programming and social culture often centers around families and couples. Potlucks, small groups, and events implicitly assume a spouse or children are present. This leaves single adults, widows and widowers, and people without local family feeling like they are on the margins of the very community meant to embody it is not good to be alone. And I've seen that happen so many times. That is why we work so hard when we do events and programs to cater them towards everyone, not just families, not just people with children or local relatives, but everyone. And that's why for the longest time we've run community Thanksgiving dinners,
Right.
was so that people who didn't have family could come.
And feel
Geared,
welcome.
right, geared specifically towards people who were single or didn't have family, widowers, so that they could come and eat with us and communicate, converse, feel a part, and belong. Not expecting them to bring lavish side items and things of that nature, but just to come and be. You don't have to bring anything, just come and be.
Right. And I missed the comment right now, but Padre Ricardo makes a good point. People take solace in having a pet that helps them feel comfortable and heal emotionally and physically too.
That's right.
Pets are always good to have, and especially nowadays there's a big argument between days, are they service animals or are they not? I say that they can be in a certain instance, especially people that have PTSD or they're stuck in homes or don't have any companionship. A pet can be a very good companionship.
Absolutely, 100%. I would go nuts without my pets sometimes.
Right?
And here's the other thing, shame keeps people from naming it.
Right.
Loneliness often carries an unspoken shame. Assumption that if you're lonely, something must be wrong with you, that you failed to build a relationship, that admitting itself is an embarrassment. It's not. This shame keeps people quiet in exactly the community that is supposed to be safe enough to say, I'm struggling, which means the very people most in need of connection are the least likely to ask for it out loud. Again, that is why it is so important that churches, social organizations, communities make sure to connect with each person coming through the door, because they are not always able to articulate that they're struggling, that they need connection. So it is our job to have that connection waiting and ready for them, so that if that's what they need, they can connect and feel a part,
Right.
without
100%.
having to struggle through a committee or filling out forms or answering a bunch of questions. It doesn't matter why you're lonely. It doesn't matter why you need connection. It is enough to know you need it, period.
Every day, every Sunday when I say Mass in Galveston, there's always a handful of people you see at the back of the church that linger. And some people say they're just lingering because they don't want to go home. I have discovered they're lingering because they're lonely and they're looking for somebody to approach, but they don't know how to approach them. So I make that first step to approach them, to talk to them. And then you find out that they're lonely, that they're the only one at their house and they don't have no friends. And that's why they hang out in the back of the church, hoping to make a connection. So that's why I make it a habit not to run off at the church, right to the sacristy, and hang around to help them make them feel comfortable and welcome.
That's right. And that moves us into our last segment, what a faithful response actually looks like.
Right.
Presence over programming. The most effective response to loneliness is rarely a new program. It is consistent, ordinary presence. The same people showing up for each other again and again over time. Street ministry reflection, what we do at St. Francis Parish and Outreach on Green Street is not a loneliness curriculum. It is simply showing up, knowing names, remembering details about people's lives, and returning next week. That's what we do right here in the lives every single night. Just about everybody in here, I know your name. If you've asked me to pray for you, I remember that.
Right, so do I.
And I will ask follow-up. So, how are you doing? Navi, how's your ankle? Things like that. Because that is so important in making connection.
Right.
I don't do it because it grows numbers. I don't do it to make money. I do it because it is important to have that human connection to each other.
Absolutely.
Isaiah 41:10 says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." God's own promise to the isolated and afraid is not a solution to a problem, but a presence in the midst of it. And that models what human ministry to lonely people should look like as well. We should just be present. As Padre Ricardo says, when you meet a lonely person and don't know what to do, ask yourself, what would Jesus do?
Right.
Jesus would sit with them.
Right.
One of the great examples of this, and I didn't write this down, I should have, but one of the greatest examples of this was the woman at the well.
Right. That's a good example.
She was there alone, outcast, considered a harlot,
right,
by people around her. She came in the middle of the day because there would not be women there drawing from the well, because women would go early morning and late evening to draw at the well. She went in the middle of the day because she didn't want to have to be around everybody. And Jesus just sat and listened to her. That's all he did. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't offer anything but a listening ear. And she talked. And he heard her out. And then told her, you're doing what you need to do. He didn't condemn her.
We experience. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We experience that in every parish. I'm sure Bishop St. George experiences that, where we have the one person that comes off the street that comes in disheveled. They haven't had a bath in months. But it's not our place to question how come they're like that. It's our place to give them a hug, welcome them in, and ask them, what can we do? How do you need us to show up for you?
And another thing to remember in the church, smaller is often better.
Right.
Large worship gatherings matter, but the actual antidote to loneliness tends to live in smaller structures, a meal shared regularly with the same handful of people, a small prayer group, a standing weekly phone call. Practical encouragement, congregations should think less about attendance numbers and more about whether every person has at least one or two people who would notice if they disappeared for 2 weeks. Does your church, does your parish have that? If somebody disappeared tomorrow, Sunday morning, from church and wasn't back for 2 or 3 weeks, would you notice them gone?
I know.
I would. But would you? That's what's important. And actively seek out those who are missing. Luke 15:4, the parable of the lost sheep. The shepherd does not wait for the one missing sheep to find its own way back. He goes looking for it. He goes looking for that lost sheep. A practical, faithful posture towards loneliness means actively notice who has stopped showing up, who never gets invited, who eats lunch alone, and going towards them rather than waiting to be asked. I taught my daughter that when she was younger and starting in the elementary school. I always taught her to notice the people who ate lunch alone. That was the first step, just to notice who it was. And without even having to say anything, she began to go and sit with that person or those people. And she started making it a habit to go sit with the people who were alone. And she built a network of friends that is huge over the years.
Right.
Just reaching out to those who were alone. Not worrying about being popular, not worrying about sitting with the popular kids. Rather going to those who were alone. And those have become friends for life. She's 26 now. And many of those kids that she sat with for the first time in elementary school, she still communicates with, still goes out and goes to Dave and Buster's with, or goes to the mall and hangs out with, or because that's a lifelong connection she made. And you never know, that might be the thing that saved their lives.
Right. I was gonna say that she could have sat down with them on their darkest day when they were sitting there worrying. They could have been worrying about something or contemplating just self-deleting themselves.
That's
That's
right.
even a hard topic. She could have just sat down with them, and that's what they needed to turn that table and say, "I'm not gonna do that."
That's right.
She's a saving grace for them.
That's right. And as pastors, because we do have some pastors who listen to this podcast,
Correct, we do.
naming loneliness without shame from the pulpit in pastoral care is a necessity.
Yes.
Simply saying out loud and preaching in pastoral conversation that loneliness is common, human, and nothing to be ashamed of can be enough to give someone permission to finally say, me too.
Right. Taking the stigma away from it, and then not
Absolutely.
saying and not being making loneliness not being an embarrassment is key, because people sit in church and they think, oh, well, I'm lonely, so it's a stigma. I'm not going to put that out there. And the pastors that refuse to address it are part of the problem. They're complicit in not helping the situation. We as pastors have to address that situation head on.
We took a cue from the Metropolitan Community Church that we rent space from for our parish. They have this thing called a connection card.
I love those cards. They're nice.
Everyone fills them out on Sunday morning. It's how they keep up with who's there, who's missing, that kind of thing. They drop them in the collection plate. It's just a second nature thing at this point. And of course, if they have an address change, an email change, phone number change, they can jot that down on the connection card and it gets put in the system, right? On the back of it, it has a section for prayer requests, but it also has a section for just anything you need. Anything you want the pastor to know, anything you want the congregation to know, whatever. Well, the next practical suggestion in this is congregations can build in low-pressure ways for people to signal, I could use a meal, a call, or a visit without having to make it a big, vulnerable announcement about it. That's where the connection cards are wonderful. Somebody can write on it, I need a visit.
Right.
I want to talk to the pastor. I could really use somebody bringing me a meal on Wednesday. No big announcement. No big hoopla. It goes quietly in the collection plate. The only person that sees it is the pastor and administrator. In our case, I'm the one who sees it in our parish because I collect those after Mass.
Right.
And I get to see, and it says, I need a visit. I'll set up a visit with you. That is an important way to signal, without making a big deal of it, that you are in need of assistance, that you are lonely, that there's a need for you to connect with someone. And so every church should have a system like that built in.
Right. And that's why I believe in the connection cards, and that's why people should use them, because the biggest thing is, if we don't know what the issue is, we can't help. We have to know what is actually going on so we can help and provide those services you may need. But on the same token, I took something that I got from MCC, one of the members there, I'm not going to name names right now, but always said, I love you and there's nothing you can do about that. I use that every Sunday and it gets a kick out of the congregation. They get a kick out of it. But it makes them feel that I'm making them feel welcome and that I'm approachable.
Absolutely, 100%. And he also says, give somebody a hug today, because it might be the bridge that gets them from today until the next time you see them.
Right.
And that's important too.
Yep.
Loneliness is a discipleship issue, not just a pastoral care issue.
Right.
Community and connections are not simply nice extras for people who are struggling. They are part of what it means to follow Christ faithfully, since Jesus himself modeled companionship and asked for it. A congregation that takes loneliness seriously is not doing a side ministry. It is living out the same conviction God stated at the very beginning of creation. It is not good for a person to be alone. What are your final thoughts on this topic, Bishop?
I was going to say, it's funny how all this stuff that we've been talking about the last couple of days wrangled into one common theme. And I actually figured it out last night. This is why we're all together again. And it all comes into one common theme. And I don't know, even know if you even realized it, but I did last night. I had that aha moment. This is what we call faith in action.
100%. So to recap, loneliness is not simply a personal mood or a scheduling problem. It is named in the very first pages of Scripture as something that is not good. It carries real physical and spiritual weight, and the church has both a theological reason and a practical calling to respond to it well. The response is rarely a new program. It is the ordinary, consistent presence, actively seeking out who is missing, and naming loneliness without shame so people feel safe enough to say they are struggling. If you're listening today and you are lonely, that is not a personal failure. And this community and this show wants you to know you are not alone in feeling alone. You can always reach out for help to Bishop Godsey at myocci.org or by visiting ourstfrancis.org. I'm there for you. I will help you connect to resources in your local area as much as humanly possible. As always, we hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and if you'd like to listen to previous editions, you can do so at podcast.myocci.social, on Apple Podcast, and wherever you find your favorite podcast. We're live every Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on younow.com/Bishop Greg and TikTok at Expanding Your Faith. Reverend Mark returns next week. I want to thank Bishop Ben for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I always appreciate doing the show with you.
And we appreciate all of your hard work, Bishop Ben, as our producer and keeping us on track with time and everything else.
Thank you.
Until next week, when we're going to talk about not putting people on pedestals and still honoring those who deserve it. That'll be our topic next Saturday. Until we once again attempt to expand your faith, keep shining bright, my friends.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Expanding Your Faith. If today's conversation encouraged you, share the episode. It helps more people find the show. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also find us online at podcasts.myocci.social and ourstfrancis.org. Follow us on Facebook at Expanding Your Faith. Our producer is Bishop Ben Williams. Expanding Your Faith is an outreach ministry of St. Francis Parish and Outreach in Augusta, Georgia. Produced in cooperation with the Metropolitan Community Church of Our Redeemer in Augusta, Georgia. Until next time, keep expanding your faith.